Hey everyone, this is Billy from Billy Footwear, here to help you determine what size of shoes are going to work for you. For the technique we're using in this video, you are going to need a piece of paper, a measuring tape, a pen, your foot or your orthotic brace, and perhaps a friend to help you out. Okay, so after you have the paper secured on the ground, the first step is actually stepping on the paper, making sure your heel is against the wall. Step 2 is to mark on the paper the actual length of your foot or your orthotic at the longest point. Step 3 is to measure what that length is, which will be your A dimension. Now this A dimension will make more sense when we get into the sizing chart part in a few moments. Okay, now that you have your A dimension, next you're going to measure around the ball of your foot or your orthotic brace, which will become your D dimension. Now this D dimension is rather critical because it dictates whether or not the shoes will be able to zip shut. Now that you have your D dimension, the next circumference measurement is a little bit farther up the foot towards the ankle, which will become your E dimension. And now that we have our measurements, the next step is comparing these measurements against our sizing chart. Okay, here is our sizing chart, which there are a bunch of links on billyfootwear.com to this chart. The easiest way to find it, I find, is in the footer of each of the pages where it's identified as sizing chart. When you click on that link, this will pop up and you'll notice that it is measured in both centimeters and inches. So highlighting some of the points on this chart, in the upper right hand corner you can see two illustrations. One is kind of a profile of a foot, as well as to the right of that you see a top view of an open shoe. In the upper left, you can see the letters A, B, C, D, and E, which kind of gives some definition and more context to what those letters represent. So going through those, the letter A, that represents the actual foot or brace length. B represents the actual shoe footbed length. C, the actual shoe footbed width at the ball of the foot. Now before we go further, the B and C dimensions, those come in handy when you are comparing your existing shoes compared to the Billy shoes. So for example, if you have some shoes in the closet, you just love them to death, you've worn them lots and lots and lots, you know they work, and you're just kind of comparing, you want to know how those would compare size-wise to the Billy shoes. It's very easy to take the insert out of your existing shoes, measure that insert both length and width, and that'll give you some good context on how those compare to the Billy shoes. Okay, moving on, dimensions D and E. D is the circumference inside the shoe at the ball of the foot, and E is the circumference inside the shoe near the ankle. So in the measurements that we just did, we measured dimension A, dimension D, and dimension E. And taking those measurements and applying that to the chart, we can see which shoe will match up those dimensions. Something I forgot to mention on the E dimension, you'll notice for the laced high top and the laced low top, that E dimension, there's a little note underneath it that says adjustable, and there's a double asterisk. Well, the double asterisk correlates to the box above that, and it talks about how, the measurements that are shown in those rows, that kind of represents with the laces in a very loose configuration. That's more on the upper threshold of what that opening would be. So because there are laces, you have the ability to cinch that down to really get the desired fit. The non-laced low tops, on the other hand, they do not have laces, so that E dimension is rather fixed. There is some elastic gore in there which allows some flexibility, but not too much. So before we dive in, let's take a look at the chart itself. Along the top bar, you can see the various sizes that we have to offer. You'll notice the sizes are listed in both US sizes, European sizes, and UK sizes. Okay, the measurements. The measurement for A that we took, it measured in at 9 1/4 inches. So when you apply that to the chart, you'll notice that 9 1/4 inches lines up perfectly with a size 5 shoe. Continuing on, looking at the D dimension, the measurement was 8 3/8 inches. So looking at the lace high top, looking at that D dimension, as well as the lace low top, as well as the non-lace low top, you can see that 8 3/8 inches is within the threshold of all three of those. Now moving on to the E dimension was 9 1/4 inches, which works well for the lace high top and the lace low top, However, you'll notice for the non-laced low top, that exceeds the 9 inches. So most likely it will work because there is some elastic gore within the non-laced low top right at the opening there, but it'll probably be a little bit snug. So in this example, I would recommend going with the laced high top or the laced low top in a size 5. Okay, let's do one more example. And this example is actually quite common when folks are measuring for their AFOs or SMOs. Let's say that they measure the A dimension, so the foot length or the brace length, and it comes in at 7 1/4 inches. Well, 7 1/4 inches works out perfectly for a size 12 little kid shoe. However, when they measure the D dimension, they find that the D dimension, which is the circumference around the ball of the foot or the brace, it comes in at 7 3/4 inches. Well, 7 3/4 inches actually correlates to a size 13, not a size 12, and that's in the high top. 7 3/4 inches in the low top, that's actually somewhere in between a size 1 and a size 2. So what do they do in this situation? Well, first off, the greatest dimension is the driver of what size shoe and what style of shoe you're going to be able to use. So with the 7 3/4 inch D dimension, it's not going to work for the size 12, and going with the size 1 and size 2 is going to be too great. It's going to be too long for the foot. So what I would do in this situation is I would go with a size 13 laced high top and take out the insert inside the shoe to make sure it fits.